Women in Literature is a course that is a survey of writing by women and looks at images of women in writing as well. But in my teaching of the course, we read almost virtually all writing by women, and we have been studying these writings in chronological order to give a historical context and to see the development of writing by women over time, and to see how they have built upon writers that came before them, each writer building on writers that came before her, to take us to the present. We have to cover a lot in a short period of time, but I try to just pick different genres of writing, from nonfiction to fiction to poetry, that represent at least a sliver of what we can see from these different periods. Many of these writers have never been presented in the form that we can see them today. Some of these writers are their work is just being uncovered and re-edited and submitted to the public. So we're getting a chance to see voices that have just not been available. Many of these writers who have been available just are not read very often. So on a very basic level, I want to expose students to these voices that may not be easily accessed or stumbled across, if not in a course like this. Then we get a chance to look at the many interlocking themes that come up in this sort of writing. We look at the ways women have been suppressed and what sort of result comes from that, what sort of result on a personal level as we read in their writings, as well as on a professional level. We touch on the role of marriage and relationships and children. We talk about issues like fertility. We talk about issues like political activism, and try to contextualize these writers as much as possible. Other large themes include psychological issues such as madness and mental health. It's often in the field, madness is a term that is often referred to. But we look at the effect of isolation and the effect of the absence of the ability to write and express oneself at different time periods, and how the constraints of marriage and family have affected women. We look at conceptions of sexuality and identity, and we look at how women envision God. The course, I've taught it twice now, and usually it's about 95% women. Both times there have been about 4 or so men and about over 20 women. The men have been as vocal as the women in the classes both times I've taught it, and it's always a pleasure to hear the male perspective as well in the course. And sometimes I try to ask specifically, when certain issues come up, how they feel from their perspective about these issues. Well, I try to engage the students in various ways. One way is to translate, so to speak, some of the writings into contemporary language as we work through them. We have a lot of discussion in class, and whether in a large group or in smaller groups, and we do a lot of responsive writing to these pieces of literature. One of our assignments is to interview a woman writer who is writing today, and the writer can be published or not published. The point is that the woman must consider herself to be a writer. It's part of her identity, and the students interview these women about how they see their roles as a writer, as a woman writer, what their writing process is, and it's open-ended, so the questions can go in whatever direction the students want to take the questions. And sometimes they interview, I've had a few students who interviewed famous writers who emailed them and they responded, and so they did it over email, and some students who interview their grandmothers or other relatives who also write and consider themselves writers. Students have, their reactions range from pride in a lot of the women we're reading, and male or female students. Sometimes anger when we're reading about injustices and discussing topics that we can see problems are still going on today. And sometimes students bring in, personal stories as well, which can create quite a emotional response at times. And I think students are very glad to be aware of such writers and to understand more of how women have been part of or excluded from the literary tradition, and usually want to continue reading these writers. So overall, the response has been very positive, but at the same time, perhaps also justifiably very, at times, upset or angry to read about some of the accounts of these women. I would encourage anyone to take this class. It's offered, I believe, every semester, and whether, I'm not the only, there's a number of professors who take different approaches, sometimes thematic approaches rather than chronological, for example. And I just think it's a wonderful and very critical complement to other literature courses that are available, as well as exposing students to, it's somewhat interdisciplinary, the course, and so, because it touches on so many issues, historical, sociological, so on. So if you're looking for an interdisciplinary kind of experience that also practices your own writing skills, both critical and at times creative, then this could be a good course for you. And if you're willing to read from a variety of time periods, then, and try to explore sort of the big picture and understand, hopefully, yourself and the role of gender in your own life, then this would be a good course.